I did not think my coworker Marcus could get any lower until he leaned over my desk and slid a glossy, silver invitation right next to my keyboard. He smirked, his eyes gleaming with a malicious satisfaction that made my stomach turn instantly. "You should probably RSVP for the annual company gala, David, because I am bringing a very special +1. And I want to make sure you have front row seats," Marcus whispered, his voice dripping with condescension. I looked down at the invitation, then up at his smug face, wondering what kind of game he was playing now. We had been competing for the promotion to Vice President of Global Operations for the past 6 months, and Marcus had used every dirty trick in the book to undermine me. But nothing prepared me for the photograph he pulled out of his breast pocket and tapped with his manicured index finger. It was a picture of my ex-wife, Qley, laughing as she sat on Marcus's lap at a high-end rooftop bar, holding a glass of champagne that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. They looked incredibly cozy, her hand resting on his chest in a way she had not done with me in years. Qley and I had finalized our incredibly messy, agonizing divorce just 8 months ago, after I discovered she had been draining our joint savings account to fund her secret lifestyle. To see her now, arms wrapped around the man who was actively trying to destroy my career, felt like a physical blow to my chest. I kept my face completely expressionless, refusing to give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing me break down in the middle of our open-plan office. I slowly picked up the photo, looked at it for a brief second, and then slid it back across the desk to him. "I hope she enjoys your company, Marcus, because she is an incredibly expensive habit to maintain. And your current salary definitely will not cover her taste in designer handbags," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. Marcus laughed, a harsh, grating sound that drew the attention of a few nearby software developers who quickly looked away when I glanced in their direction. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of expensive coffee and arrogance. "Do not worry about my finances, David, because when I get that VP promotion next week, I will be making more than enough to keep her happy. Besides, Qley told me everything about your marriage, including how boring and inadequate you were in every single department." He walked away, chuckling to himself, leaving me staring at my computer screen with my blood boiling and my heart hammering against my ribs. I sat there for a long moment, taking deep, slow breaths to steady my racing thoughts. The divorce had left me financially drained and emotionally exhausted, but I had finally started to rebuild my life, finding peace in my quiet apartment and throwing myself into my work. Now, the toxic whirlwind that was Qley had returned, and she had teamed up with my worst professional enemy to destroy the one thing I had left. I knew Qley's pattern of behavior all too well. She was a master manipulator who never did anything without a calculated, financial motive. She did not love Marcus. She loved the status he was chasing, and more importantly, she loved the idea of torturing me. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed on my desk, displaying an unknown number that I immediately recognized from the last digit sequence. I answered it, bracing myself for the venom I knew was coming. "I hope you liked the photo, David, because I cannot wait to see your face when we walk into that gala together next Friday." Qley's voice came through the speaker, sounding entirely too pleased with herself. "Why are you doing this, Qley? We are divorced, the papers are signed, and you took almost everything I had. Why can you not just leave me alone?" I asked, keeping my voice low so my team would not overhear. "Because you did not appreciate me when you had me, and now I want you to watch someone else give me the life I actually deserve." "Marcus is everything you never were, David. He is successful, he is ambitious, and he is going to be your boss very, very soon." She laughed, a familiar, mocking sound that used to make me feel so incredibly small during our arguments, but this time, it ignited something else inside me. It ignited a cold, hard determination to stop being the victim. I hung up without saying another word, staring at the phone, and then I turned my attention to my computer. If Marcus and Qley wanted to play a high-stakes game of public humiliation, they were going to learn that I was not the same pushover they thought I was. I began to look through the project folders for our upcoming VP evaluation, reviewing the budget reports and resource allocation sheets that Marcus had submitted to the board. Something had bothered me about his recent numbers for weeks, but I had been too busy with my own projects to investigate thoroughly. Marcus had been managing the expansion project for our new European logistics hub, a massive undertaking with a budget of over $15 million. As I scrolled through his ledger entries, my eyes caught a series of payments made to an external consulting firm called Apex Logistics Consulting. The name sounded incredibly generic, and the invoices were billed at exactly $99,000 each, just under the threshold that required secondary approval from the chief financial officer. Over the last 4 months, Marcus had approved 6 of these invoices, totaling nearly $600,000. I opened our corporate registry and searched for Apex Logistics Consulting, but found no record of them being an approved vendor in our central system. I decided to dig deeper, using my senior administrator access to search the state business registry for the ownership details of Apex. What I found made my heart skip a beat and my hands freeze over my keyboard. Apex Logistics Consulting had been registered exactly 5 months ago, and the sole registered owner was Qley Vance, my ex-wife, using her maiden name. They were not just dating, they were actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company using fake consulting invoices. I sat in my chair, staring at the glowing screen, realizing the sheer scale of the trap they had walked themselves into. They thought they were so incredibly clever, using Qley's maiden name and keeping the invoices just below the CFO review limit, thinking no one would ever notice. But they had underestimated my attention to detail, and they had let their desire to gloat blind them to their own stupidity. I knew I could not just take this to human resources or my immediate supervisor right away, because Marcus had powerful allies on the board who might try to sweep it under the rug to avoid a scandal. I needed absolute, undeniable proof that could be presented directly to the chief executive officer, Mr. Henderson, who was famous for his zero-tolerance policy on corporate fraud. I contacted an old friend of mine, Sarah, who worked in our forensic accounting department, and asked her to meet me for lunch at a quiet diner 3 blocks away from the office. When she arrived, I laid out the printed invoices and the state registry document on the table between us. Sarah looked at the papers, her eyes widening as she realized the implications of what she was looking at. This is incredibly serious, David. If these invoices do not have any actual deliverables attached to them, this is straight-up corporate embezzlement and grand larceny. Can you check the internal bank routing numbers for these payments without raising any red flags in the system? I asked her, leaning across the table. I need to know exactly where that money went once it hit the Apex Logistics account. Sarah nodded slowly, her expression grim. I can do it, but it will take me a couple of days to gather the digital paper trail. If Marcus finds out we are looking into this, he will delete everything he can and run. We have to be extremely careful, I agreed. He thinks he has already won, and he is completely focused on humiliating me at the gala next Friday. Let him keep thinking that. Over the next 4 days, I went to work every single day pretending nothing was wrong, enduring Marcus's arrogant remarks and his deliberate attempts to make me look bad in meetings. He would constantly interrupt me, make snide comments about my department's performance, and drop subtle hints about his amazing new relationship. The entire office was starting to whisper about it, as Qley had started showing up at the lobby of our building during lunch hours, waiting for Marcus while wearing expensive designer clothes. She would look at me with a triumphant, mocking smile whenever I walked past her, clearly waiting for me to make a scene. I never gave her the satisfaction. I would simply nod politely, walk past her, and head back to my desk to continue working with Sarah to build our case. By Wednesday afternoon, Sarah sent me an encrypted file containing the absolute, undeniable proof we needed. She had traced the $600,000 from our corporate accounts directly into the Apex Logistics Consulting bank account. From there, more than half of the funds had been transferred directly into a joint offshore account in the Cayman Islands registered under both Marcus's and Qley's names. The rest of the money had been used to pay off Qley's massive credit card debts and to purchase a brand new luxury sports car that Marcus had been driving to work for the past week. They had even used the company credit card to pay for the security deposit on a massive penthouse apartment they had just rented together. They were living like royalty on stolen money, completely convinced they were too smart to ever get caught. I spent the entire night compiling a comprehensive, professional report, complete with banking records, state registry documents, fake invoice copies, and a detailed timeline of the fraud. I printed 3 copies, placing them in thick, sealed folders, and kept the digital files backed up on 3 separate secure drives. On Thursday morning, I requested a private meeting with Mr. Henderson, the CEO, for Friday afternoon, just 3 hours before the annual company gala was scheduled to begin. His secretary confirmed the appointment, noting that Mr. Henderson was incredibly busy but would give me 15 minutes of his time. Friday arrived, and the office was buzzing with excitement for the gala, which was being held at the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious 5-star hotel. Everyone was dressed in their finest attire, and Marcus was walking around the office like he already owned the place, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo. He stopped by my cubicle at 3 o'clock, adjusting his gold cufflinks with a ridiculous flourish. "Still planning on showing up tonight, David? Or are you going to stay home and cry into a bowl of microwave soup?" I looked up at him, wearing a calm, relaxed smile that seemed to catch him slightly off guard. "Oh, I will definitely be there, Marcus. I wouldn't miss tonight for the world." He snorted, shaking his head. "Suit yourself, loser. Just try not to make a scene when you see Qley on my arm. She is wearing a $10,000 gown that I bought her, and she looks absolutely stunning." I watched him walk away, and then I picked up my sealed folders and walked towards the executive elevator to keep my appointment with the CEO. When I entered Mr. Henderson's top-floor office, the older man looked up from his massive oak desk, looking tired but sharp. "David, thank you for coming. I hope this is important, as I have to get ready for the gala in a couple of hours." "It is extremely important, Mr. Henderson. It concerns a massive, ongoing financial fraud within our logistics department, totaling over $600,000. I said, placing the first folder directly in front of him. Mr. Henderson's demeanor changed instantly. He sat up straight, his eyes narrowing as he opened the folder and began to read the executive summary I had prepared. As he flipped through the pages, his face went from curiosity to disbelief, and then to a deep, dark rage. He looked at the bank transfer records, the invoices, and the offshore account details, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the paperwork. "Are you absolutely certain about these connection details, David? Is this Marcus's signature authorizing these payments to your ex-wife's shell company?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, sir. I have included the digital signatures and IP address logs showing that every single one of those invoices was approved from Marcus's personal work computer. Additionally, the forensic accounting department has verified the transfer of those funds directly to their joint account." Mr. Henderson closed the folder with a loud snap, leaning back in his chair and staring at the ceiling for a long moment. He was a man who had built this company from the ground up, and he despised nothing more than disloyalty and theft. "This is a massive criminal offense," Mr. Henderson said, looking back at me. "They're stealing from my company, from our shareholders, and they thought they could get away with it by hiding behind a divorce dispute." I kept quiet, letting him process the anger. He looked at me, his eyes softening slightly. "You handled this incredibly professionally, David. Most men in your position would have reacted emotionally and ruined the chance to catch them." "Thank you, sir. I wanted to ensure the company was fully protected before any action was taken," I replied. Mr. Henderson picked up his desk phone and dialed a number. "Get the head of corporate security and our legal counsel up here immediately. And call the local police department's white-collar crime division. I have an active grand larceny case to report." He hung up, then looked at me with a cold, calculating smile. "David, I want you to go to the gala tonight and enjoy yourself. Act completely normal, and let Marcus and Qley think they are the king and queen of the room." "What is the plan, sir?" I asked. "The police will be arriving at the hotel ballroom at exactly 9 o'clock, Mr. Henderson explained. We are going to let them make their grand entrance, and then we are going to expose them in front of the entire company and the board of directors. They wanted a show, so we are going to give them one they will never forget. I left his office feeling an incredible sense of relief and anticipation. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for months was suddenly gone, replaced by a calm, steady confidence. I went home, showered, and put on my best black suit. I looked at myself in the mirror, realizing that for the first time in over a year, I looked genuinely happy and relaxed. At 7 o'clock, I arrived at the luxury hotel. The ballroom was breathtaking, filled with sparkling chandeliers, beautiful ice sculptures, and a live jazz band playing in the corner. Hundreds of my coworkers were already there, drinking champagne and talking in small groups. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and stood near the back of the room, watching the crowd. Within minutes, I noticed a sudden hush fall over the group of developers standing near the main entrance. I turned my head and saw Marcus and Qley making their grand entrance, looking exactly as arrogant as I expected. Marcus was holding Qley's hand, leading her into the room like she was a prize trophy. Qley was wearing a sparkling, deep red designer gown that was incredibly loud and flashy, drawing everyone's attention. She had her head held high, looking around the room with a smug, self-satisfied grin, clearly searching for me. When her eyes finally locked onto mine, her smile grew wider, and she whispered something into Marcus's ear. Marcus laughed, patting her hand, and began walking directly towards me, parting the crowd of coworkers who were watching the drama unfold with bated breath. "David, I am so glad you could make it," Marcus called out, his voice loud enough to ensure that everyone nearby could hear him. "I want to officially introduce you to my beautiful date for the evening. I believe you two have met before?" Several coworkers gasped, looking back and forth between us, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Qley stepped forward, looking down her nose at me, her eyes filled with pure malice. "Hello, David. I must say, you look surprisingly put together tonight. I was worried you would still be wearing those cheap, depressing suits you always insisted on buying when we were married," Qley said, her voice dripping with venom. I took a slow sip of my water, looking at her with an expression of calm amusement that seemed to irritate her instantly. "Hello, Qley. You look very expensive tonight. I hope you enjoy the dress, because red is definitely your color." Marcus stepped in front of her, puffing out his chest. "Do not speak to her like that, David. She is with a real man now, someone who can actually provide for her. And speaking of success, I hear the board is announcing the new vice president of global operations tonight. Is that so?" I asked, tilting my head. "Yes, it is," Marcus sneered. "And since my project has been performing so incredibly well financially, I think we both know who is getting that office on the top floor. You might want to start looking for another job, David, because when I take over, your days at this company are numbered." Several of our colleagues looked incredibly uncomfortable, but Marcus was too drunk on his own arrogance to notice the tension. Qley laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I told you he was a loser, Marcus. He always has been. He is just going to stand there and take it, because he has absolutely no spine," Qley said, loud enough for a nearby board member to hear. Before I could reply, the room suddenly went quiet as Mr. Henderson walked onto the stage at the front of the ballroom, holding a microphone. He looked commanding and powerful, his presence instantly commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Good evening, everyone, Mr. Henderson's voice boomed through the speakers. "I want to thank you all for another spectacular year of growth and success. Before we begin the dinner, I have two very important announcements to make." Marcus smirked at me, whispering, "Watch closely, David. This is the moment your career ends." "First," Mr. Henderson continued, "I want to address the position of Vice President of Global Operations. As many of you know, we have been evaluating candidates for this crucial role over the past several months." Marcus straightened his tie, taking a step forward as if he was already preparing to walk up to the stage. Qley was practically glowing with excitement, clutching his arm tightly. "We had a candidate who seemed to have exceptional results on paper, Mr. Henderson said, his voice turning cold and serious. However, during a recent internal review, we discovered that this individual was using their position to commit a massive, systematic fraud against this company. A murmur of confusion and shock swept through the ballroom. People began whispering to each other, looking around the room to see who Mr. Henderson was referring to. Marcus froze, his smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second, before he quickly recovered and looked around, pretending to be just as confused as everyone else. This individual, Mr. Henderson said, his eyes locking directly onto Marcus, approved over $600,000 in fraudulent invoices to a fake consulting firm, which was registered under his partner's maiden name. They then transferred those funds to a joint offshore account in the Cayman Islands to fund their lavish lifestyle. The entire ballroom went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop as the reality of the situation began to set in. Marcus's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, pale white. Qley's hand slipped off his arm, her eyes wide with sudden terror as she looked at the stage, then at me, and then back to the stage. Marcus Vance, or should I say, Marcus and his accomplice, Qley, Mr. Henderson said, his voice echoing through the silent room. I suggest you both look towards the back entrance of the ballroom. Everyone in the room turned around. Standing at the entrance were 4 uniformed police officers, accompanied by 2 detectives in suits and our head of corporate security. Marcus took a step back, his hands shaking violently as he tried to speak. Mr. Henderson, this is a mistake. This is a complete misunderstanding. David is setting me up. He is just bitter about the divorce. The lead detective walked forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Marcus Miller, you are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate fraud, and embezzlement. Qley Vance, you are also under arrest as an active co-conspirator to these crimes. No, this cannot be happening. Qley screamed, her voice cracking as she tried to back away from the officers. Marcus, do something. You told me we were completely safe. You told me no one would ever find out. Her sudden outburst was an immediate admission of guilt, and the remaining doubts in the minds of our coworkers vanished instantly. The crowd parted quickly, leaving Marcus and Qley standing in an empty circle, completely exposed and isolated. One of the police officers grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling his hands behind his back and clicking the metal handcuffs into place. Marcus looked completely broken, his expensive tuxedo now looking like a ridiculous costume as he hung his head in absolute defeat. Qley began to cry hysterically as the female officer grabbed her wrists, securing the handcuffs behind her back. Her expensive red dress was wrinkled, her makeup was running down her face, and the luxury she had tried so hard to flaunt had turned into her own prison. As they were being led out of the ballroom in front of more than 300 of our colleagues, Qley looked at me. Her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and desperate pleading. David, please. You have to help me. Tell them it was all Marcus's idea. I did not know where the money was coming from. I still love you, David. Please do not let them do this to me. She wailed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I stood there, holding my glass of water, and looked her dead in the eye. I did not say a single word. I simply gave her a small, polite nod, the exact same nod I had given her in the lobby when she had tried to humiliate me. The officers dragged them out of the ballroom, and the heavy double doors clicked shut behind them. For a few seconds, the room remained completely silent, everyone still processing the absolute chaos that had just unfolded. Then, Mr. Henderson cleared his throat into the microphone, drawing everyone's attention back to the stage. Now that the trash has been successfully removed from the building, I would like to make my second announcement, Mr. Henderson said, a warm, genuine smile returning to his face. I am incredibly proud to announce that our new Vice President of Global Operations, effective immediately, is David Vance. The entire ballroom erupted into a deafening applause. My colleagues began clapping, cheering, and slapping me on the back, their faces filled with genuine happiness and respect. Sarah, my friend from forensic accounting, raised her glass to me from across the room, a triumphant smile on her face. I smiled back, taking a deep breath, feeling an incredible sense of vindication and victory. The investigation that followed was swift and devastating for Marcus and Qley. Because of the ironclad digital evidence and banking paper trail we had provided, the district attorney had an incredibly easy case. Marcus, facing up to 15 years in state prison, quickly cracked under pressure and agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to grand larceny and corporate fraud. He was sentenced to 8 years in a medium-security prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to the company, which stripped him of every single asset he had ever owned. His credit was completely destroyed, his professional reputation was permanently ruined, and he will never be able to work in the corporate world ever again. Qley tried to fight the charges, hiring an expensive lawyer using the last of her family's money. But the evidence of her ownership of Apex Logistics and the transfers to her personal account was undeniable. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit grand larceny and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Her wealthy family, utterly embarrassed by the public scandal and the loss of their reputation in the city's social circles, completely disowned her and refused to pay for her appeal or help her with her legal debts. The brand-new luxury sports car and all of her expensive designer clothes were seized by the state to help pay back the stolen funds. She went from living in a luxury penthouse to sitting in a cold, concrete cell, with absolutely nothing and no one left in her corner. As for me, the promotion to vice president came with a massive salary increase, a beautiful corner office on the top floor, and the complete respect of everyone in the company. I moved out of my small apartment and bought a gorgeous, quiet house overlooking the lake, a place filled with light and peace. I no longer have to look over my shoulder, and I no longer have to carry the heavy burden of my past. I fought their malice with intelligence, their arrogance with patience, and in the end, I watched them destroy themselves while I walked away into a bright, successful future. The transition into my new role as Vice President of Global Operations was not as smooth as I had hoped, mostly because of the sheer volume of corruption Marcus had left behind in his wake. As I sat at my new mahogany desk, looking out over the city skyline, I realized that cleaning up his mess would require going through every single project he had touched over the last 3 years. Security had cleared out Marcus's personal belongings, but they had left his locked desk drawers and his encrypted backup drives for the forensic IT team to analyze. Since I was now the head of the department, the IT director handed me a decrypted copy of Marcus's local drive, suggesting I look through his personal archives to see if any active client contracts had been compromised. As I began scrolling through his deleted folders, I found a hidden partition labeled with a string of random numbers that did not match any standard company project codes. My curiosity was piqued, and using the administrative bypass keys, I opened the partition to find a series of encrypted chat logs and email threads that had been completely wiped from the main company servers. The messages were not between Marcus and Qley, as I had initially expected, but rather between Marcus and an anonymous external email address using the handle Silverfox77. The tone of these messages was incredibly professional, cold, and calculated, discussing the systematic draining of our European logistics hub budget. What chilled me to the bone was a message sent just 2 weeks before the gala, where Silverfox77 told Marcus that the $99,000 invoices were becoming too noticeable and suggested they prepare for a much larger final transfer of $5 million from our upcoming acquisition fund. Marcus had replied, saying that once he secured the VP promotion, he would have the unilateral authority to sign off on the acquisition payment without any board oversight. This meant Marcus and Qley were not the masterminds of this entire operation. They were merely the greedy foot soldiers of someone much higher up in the corporate hierarchy. I stared at the screen, realizing that whoever Silverfox77 was, they had access to our most sensitive board meetings and knew exactly when the acquisition funds would be released. I immediately called Sarah back into my office, locking the door behind her and showing her the decrypted messages on my screen. She leaned in close, her eyes scanning the text as her face grew increasingly pale with every passing second. "David, This is terrifying, Sarah whispered, looking up at me with genuine fear in her eyes. The acquisition fund is managed by a private escrow account that only 3 people in this entire company have the authorization keys to access. Who are those 3 people, Sarah? I asked, my voice barely louder than a whisper as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. It is Mr. Henderson, our Chief Financial Officer Robert Vance, and the head of the board's audit committee, Richard Harrington, she replied, her hands trembling slightly as she wrote the names down on a piece of paper. Robert Vance was Qley's distant uncle, the man who had originally recommended Marcus for his position at the company 3 years ago. And Richard Harrington was a powerful billionaire investor who owned 15% of our corporate stock. If either of those men was Silver Fox 77, I was dealing with an enemy who had the power to destroy my life and my career with a single phone call. I knew I had to play this incredibly smart because one wrong move would alert the mastermind, and they would immediately delete all remaining evidence and frame me for the entire conspiracy. I instructed Sarah to keep this discovery strictly confidential and to continue monitoring the escrow account access logs on a minute-by-minute basis. The next morning, I received an unexpected phone call from a local criminal defense attorney named Arthur Pendleton, who claimed to represent my ex-wife, Qley. He sounded extremely desperate, asking if I would be willing to meet him at a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city to discuss a matter of extreme urgency regarding Qley's pending trial. I initially wanted to refuse, as I wanted absolutely nothing to do with Qley or her legal troubles, but something told me that she might hold the missing piece of the puzzle. I agreed to meet him at 2 o'clock that afternoon, ensuring I wore a high-quality digital voice recorder hidden inside my suit jacket pocket. When I arrived at the diner, Arthur Pendleton was already sitting in a corner booth, sweating profusely and nervously shuffling through a stack of legal documents. He looked up as I approached, his face filled with relief as he quickly gestured for me to sit down across from him. "Thank you for coming, David. I know you have absolutely no reason to help my client, but Qley is in a state of absolute terror in the county jail, and she is desperate to make a deal," the attorney said, leaning across the table. "She is facing 4 years in state prison, Mr. Pendleton." "I do not see what we have to discuss," I replied coldly, keeping my hands flat on the table. "She has information, David, very valuable information that she kept as an insurance policy in case Marcus ever tried to double-cross her," he whispered, looking around to ensure the waitress was out of earshot. "She has a physical USB drive hidden in a safe deposit box containing the private banking details and communication logs of the person who actually orchestrated the embezzlement scheme." My heart began to hammer against my ribs, but I kept my face completely expressionless, refusing to show him how incredibly important this information was to me. "And let me guess, she wants me to help her get a reduced sentence in exchange for this drive?" I asked. "She wants you to sign a formal character reference letter to the sentencing judge, stating that she was a victim of Marcus's manipulation and financial abuse," Pendleton explained. "If you, the primary victim of her betrayal, sign that letter, the judge will almost certainly reduce her sentence to probation with no active prison time." I sat there, staring at the attorney, disgust rising in my throat at the thought of Qley trying to escape the consequences of her actions by pretending to be a victim. But I also knew that the USB drive she possessed was the only way to expose the high-level corrupt official who was currently threatening the entire company. "Tell Qley that I will not sign any letter until I have the USB drive in my hands, and my forensic team has verified that the data is genuine and complete," I said, my voice firm and uncompromising. "Once I have the proof, I will consider writing a letter to the judge, but I make absolutely no promises about what that letter will say." Pendleton swallowed hard, realizing he had no leverage, and slowly nodded his head. "Okay, I will speak to her tonight. She will have to authorize me to retrieve the drive from her safe deposit box and hand it over to you. But please, David, keep this quiet, because if the person on that drive finds out we are talking, Qley's life in jail won't be worth a dime." I left the diner with a renewed sense of urgency, driving straight back to the office to prepare for the storm that I knew was coming. As soon as I arrived, I was informed that Richard Harrington, the head of the audit committee, was waiting for me in my corner office. My stomach clenched as I walked down the hallway, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves before opening the heavy glass door to my office. Richard Harrington was sitting in my leather chair, his expensive gold watch catching the afternoon light as he slowly spun around to face me with a cold, predatory smile. "David, congratulations on the promotion. You have certainly made a name for yourself around here by exposing Marcus's little amateur operation," Harrington said, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial warmth. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I was just doing my job to protect the company's assets," I replied, standing near the doorway and refusing to sit down. Of course," Harrington chuckled, standing up and smoothing down his bespoke Italian suit. "But you know, David, sometimes in business, it is best to let sleeping dogs lie. You have secured your promotion, you have punished your ex-wife, and you have made your point. There is no need to keep digging into the past." I looked at him, realizing in that exact moment that Richard Harrington was Silver Fox 77. The way he spoke, the subtle threat hidden behind his polite words, and the desperate attempt to stop my investigation confirmed everything. "I am just finalizing the audit of Marcus's past accounts to ensure there are no remaining discrepancies, Mr. Harrington. I am sure you, as the head of the audit committee, would want me to be thorough," I said, looking him dead in the eye. Harrington's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, menacing stare that made the air in the room feel incredibly heavy. "Do not get arrogant, David. You are a talented manager, but you are completely out of your depth here. One phone call from me to the major shareholders, and your shiny new career will vanish faster than you can imagine. Stop digging, or you will end up far worse off than your ex-wife." He walked past me, deliberately brushing his shoulder against mine as he exited the office, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding, but my resolve stronger than ever. He was terrified of what I was going to find, and his desperate attempt to intimidate me only proved that I was incredibly close to the truth. The next morning, Qley's attorney met me in the parking lot of a quiet public park, quickly handing me a small manila envelope containing a silver USB drive before driving away without saying a single word. I rushed back to the office and went straight to Sarah's secure lab in the basement, plugging the drive into an isolated, offline computer to prevent any potential tracking malware from activating. As the files loaded, Sarah and I stared at the screen in absolute amazement. The drive contained hundreds of recorded phone conversations, screenshot messages, and offshore wire transfer receipts that linked Richard Harrington directly to Marcus's bank accounts. It was a goldmine of criminal evidence. Harrington had been using Marcus to systematically siphon millions of dollars from various company projects over the past 5 years, using a network of shell companies registered in Delaware, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. The documents also showed that Robert Vance, the CFO, was completely innocent. Harrington had been forging his digital signature on the secondary approval documents to keep himself hidden from the company's internal auditors. Harrington had planned to let Marcus take the fall if anything ever went wrong, never realizing that Qley had been secretly recording their conversations and saving the bank transfers as her own personal shield. "This is enough to put Richard Harrington away for the rest of his natural life," Sarah said, her voice trembling with excitement as she scrolled through the financial ledgers. "This is corporate espionage, money laundering, and racketeering on a massive scale. We need to present this to Mr. Henderson immediately," I said. "But we have to do it in a way that prevents Harrington from using his power on the board to block the arrest or destroy the company's public stock." I contacted Mr. Henderson directly on his private cell phone, requesting an emergency off-site meeting at a secure conference room in our corporate legal firm's downtown office. When Mr. Henderson arrived and saw the mountain of evidence we had compiled, the older man looked as though he had aged 10 years in a single second. "Richard has been a close friend of mine for over 30 years, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cracking with emotion as he looked at the wire transfer records. I trusted him with the future of this company, and he has been systematically robbing us blind while pretending to be our most loyal investor. What is the play, Mr. Henderson? I asked. We cannot let him realize we have this data, or he will liquidate his stock, transfer his remaining assets offshore, and flee the country on his private jet. Mr. Henderson's expression hardened, his eyes filling with a fierce, protective anger for the company he had spent his life building. We are going to call an emergency board of directors meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, under the pretense of finalizing the $5 million European acquisition. He looked at me, a proud smile on his face. Richard will definitely attend because he thinks he is finally going to get his hands on that money. We will let him sign the approval documents, and then we will have the federal investigators walk into the boardroom and arrest him in front of the entire board. I spent the rest of the night working with our corporate legal counsel and the federal prosecutors, preparing the final arrest warrants and organizing the digital presentation that would expose Harrington's crimes to the board. I barely slept a wink, the anticipation of the final confrontation keeping my mind racing through every possible scenario. At exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, I walked into the grand boardroom on the top floor of our corporate headquarters. The massive room was filled with our 12 board members, all dressed in expensive suits, chatting quietly as they waited for the meeting to begin. Richard Harrington was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, looking incredibly relaxed and confident as he reviewed the acquisition documents in front of him. When I walked in, he looked up and gave me a mocking, triumphant smirk, clearly believing that his threat from the day before had successfully silenced me. "Welcome, David," Harrington said, his voice booming through the room. We were just about to discuss the final allocation of the acquisition funds. "I am glad you could join us to see how real business is conducted." "Thank you, Mr. Harrington." "I wouldn't miss this meeting for anything," I replied, taking my seat next to Mr. Henderson at the opposite end of the table. Mr. Henderson stood up, tapping his pen against his water glass to silence the room. "Good morning, everyone. Before we sign off on the $5 million transfer for the European Logistics Hub, our new Vice President of Global Operations, David, has a brief presentation regarding the project's financial security." Harrington frowned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "Henderson, with all due respect, we have already audited this project thoroughly. There is no need for David to waste our time with another presentation. We need to sign these papers and move forward. I think you will find this particular presentation extremely relevant to our interests, Mr. Harrington," I said, standing up and activating the large projector screen at the front of the room. I pressed a button on my remote, and the first slide appeared on the screen, displaying a massive, detailed map of the offshore banking network that Harrington had used to launder the stolen company funds. Harrington's face instantly froze, his eyes widening in complete shock as he recognized the private account numbers and shell company names that he thought were completely hidden from the world. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrington demanded, slamming his hand on the table and standing up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Henderson, control your employee. This is an absolute outrage and a complete waste of our time. Please sit down, Richard," Mr. Henderson said, his voice incredibly calm, cold, and steady. "I suggest you listen very carefully to what David has to say." Over the next 10 minutes, I walked the board through the entire timeline of the embezzlement scheme, playing the recorded audio files of Harrington instructing Marcus to falsify the invoices, and showing the direct wire transfers from our corporate accounts into Harrington's private offshore banks. The other board members sat in absolute, stunned silence, their jaws dropping as they realized that the man sitting at the head of their table had been systematically stealing millions of dollars from under their noses for years. "This is a complete fabrication," Harrington screamed, his voice cracking with desperation as he looked around the room, realizing that his allies on the board were quickly turning away from him in disgust. "David is a disgruntled employee who is using forged documents to launch a personal vendetta against me." I pressed the final button on my remote, playing an audio recording that had been captured just 18 hours prior. Harrington's own voice echoed through the boardroom speakers. "Stop digging, David, or you will end up far worse off than your ex-wife. One phone call from me, and your shiny new career will vanish faster than you can imagine." The recording stopped, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the room. Harrington slowly sank back into his leather chair, his hands shaking violently as he realized that he had been completely trapped, with absolutely no way out. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors of the boardroom opened, and 4 federal agents walked in, accompanied by 2 armed security guards. "Richard Harrington, you are under arrest for corporate espionage, grand larceny, wire fraud, and money laundering," the lead agent announced, walking directly up to Harrington and pulling him out of his chair. Harrington did not even try to resist as they pulled his hands behind his back and clicked the heavy metal handcuffs into place. He looked completely defeated, his arrogant demeanor completely shattered as he was led out of the boardroom in front of the colleagues he had spent years manipulating and robbing. As the door closed behind them, Mr. Henderson stood up, looking around the room at the stunned board members before turning his gaze to me. "David, on behalf of the board of directors and this entire company, I want to thank you for your incredible bravery, dedication, and integrity, Mr." Henderson said, his voice filled with emotion. "You have saved this company from absolute ruin, and you have proven yourself to be a leader of the highest caliber." The remaining board members stood up, initiating a standing ovation that echoed through the top floor of the building. I smiled, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of relief and accomplishment wash over me as I thanked them all. 2 days later, I received a visit from Qley's attorney, Arthur Pendleton, who looked incredibly pale as he slid a document across my desk. "Qley wanted me to ask if you have signed the character reference letter yet, David. Her sentencing hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I picked up the black pen from my desk, pulled a piece of corporate letterhead paper toward me, and began to write. I wrote a detailed, comprehensive letter to the sentencing judge, but it was not the character reference Qley had hoped for. Instead, I detailed her active participation in the embezzlement scheme, her greed, her complete lack of remorse, and her attempts to manipulate the legal system to avoid prison. I explained how her actions had directly harmed the company, the shareholders, and the people who trusted her. And I requested that the judge impose the maximum possible sentence allowed by law. I signed my name at the bottom in bold, black ink, folded the letter, and slid it into an envelope before handing it back to the stunned attorney. "Give this to the judge, Mr. Pendleton. I think he will find it extremely helpful in making his final decision," I said, wearing a calm, peaceful smile. The attorney looked at the envelope, realizing that Qley's final, desperate attempt to manipulate me had completely backfired, and he silently left my office without saying another word. At her sentencing hearing the following Tuesday, the judge read my letter aloud in the courtroom, noting that Qley's complete lack of accountability and her attempts to blame others proved she was entirely unfit for probation. He sentenced her to the maximum of 6 years in a high-security state penitentiary, with absolutely no possibility of early parole. As she was being led out of the courtroom in her orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, she looked towards the gallery where I was sitting, her face twisted in a mixture of pure rage and heartbreaking despair. I did not feel any anger or triumph as I watched her go. I simply felt a profound sense of closure, knowing that justice had finally been served in its entirety. With Harrington's assets seized by the federal government, the company recovered almost all of the stolen funds, and our stock price soared to an all-time high as news of our rigorous internal security measures became public. I spent the next year leading the company through a massive, highly successful global expansion, earning the trust, admiration, and respect of the entire corporate world. I finally found the absolute peace and happiness that I had been searching for, living in my beautiful lake house, surrounded by true friends and a career built on honesty, hard work, and unshakable integrity. I had survived their betrayal, exposed their corruption, and built a life that was far greater and more beautiful than anything they could have ever hoped to destroy.